The Venus Project, Teamspeak Seminar, July 31st, 2011.
How would Jack explain the concept of observer of our thoughts? Is it true that we are not our thoughts, or is that not a useful question?
Well, we're all victims of culture, and so our thoughts may not be as advanced as we think they are. And sometimes, due to differences of interpretation and language, people cannot always understand the answers because they're not well read in the sciences.
What about the idea of the concept of observer of our thoughts?
I don't know what that means, but if it means that somehow buried in our brain is an objective system, that is erroneous thinking. Our brains are shaped by culture, motion pictures, books we read, role models. So I don't believe anyone is really objective unless you use the scientific method for determining the strength of materials, putting them in a machine, twisting the metal, pulling on it, compressing it, and building up statistical data on the characteristics of certain alloys. I don't know of any other system.
This person realizes that even marriage is affected by money because the parents can't get divorced because of supporting the kids, and how would this be different in a resource-based economy?
In a resource-based economy, people live together because they can relate. If they don't, they just split, just as you do as a kid. When you're 12 years old, you have certain friends. At 15, you have more information and you change the relationships. Usually, a girl that falls in love at 15 is very different than having a crush on a person at 25. And at 30, you have a different outlook. So if you're married too young, the possibility of the relationship lasting is much lower than people that can relate with better and more experiences.
I think when the resource-based economy comes into fruition, there'd be a lot of people who split up because it doesn't depend on somebody taking care of the kids, going to work and paying back support for different marriages that they have. Everybody would have access to goods and services, don't need to depend on somebody going out to work to take care of the kids. So there'd be a lot more people who are freer to do as they'd like. In the Venus Project, where there is no law enforcement, how would people be apprehended?
I think that the person that asked that question doesn't understand that the training of children includes methods of dealing with problems such as communication, disagreements without getting angry. The ability to understand the nature of conflict does away with your tendency to want to punch another person that doesn't understand you. It means you don't know how to get to them. So I would say that conflict will be diminished considerably, except during the transition. But once the children are educated in the new school, you don't have those problems. You only have those problems where you give everyone a right to their own opinion, whether they're qualified or not.
If two or more people, families, want to live at the same place, will machines make decisions on property ownership or who gets the right to live where? Or what if everyone wants to move to one place on Earth?
The assumption a lot of people make is, what if everybody wants to live in Florida? You got to remember, you got to be ruthlessly honest. Some people love change of season. Some people like skiing. Some people like the fall. Not everybody wants to live in Florida because all these stories are made up. What if everybody wants to live in the same house? Well, today, people don't want to live in the same house. They have different values. People don't all want to live in Florida. Some people like skiing, ice skating, change of seasons. All of those are false assumptions.
And would machines make the decisions as to where people would live?
No, all that machines tell you is the climate, the conditions that prevail, and you, in turn, make the decision as to where you want to live. That depends on your education and your profession. I think if you are interested in science and social change, you want to live near places that do research in that area. And so you don't have to live there forever. You live there for 2 years and move to another place. And if you change your voice, you're free to move to any area you want to. And what if everybody to the same area? There's no such thing. Because people have different values, different inspirations, and they move in accordance with where their type of logic and reason is prevalent.
And if people did need certain reasons or they wanted to be there, then there'd be more residential accommodations for them in certain areas.
The survey committee will tell us that 30,000 people are interested in some aspects of distribution of energy. Well, they will tend to associate in certain portions of the country near the source of energy. Piping energy or using electric wires to conduct electricity over great distances have tremendous power losses. So a lot of research will be done on cool conductors, in other words, with less losses. The kind of research that's done depends on the nature of the problems confronting society.
That same sort of scenario is true with, say, people who want to go boating or sailing. They make sure that there are more than enough boats to accommodate that type of demand, where people can go and just access them when they want to. What are the methods of the Venus Project for places like India and China, which have very high population densities? Do we build more cities then?
Well, first of all, we have to orient people to what the Venus Project is about. And those that identify with the direction will join with us. Those that do not identify will form their own groups. We feel in time the advocacy of the Venus Project will raise the standard of living for everyone, remove the amount of crime in the area, and I think that eventually most people will join with the Venus Project. But you can't force people to join. You can't send in armies and make them democratic.
What about high population densities? The question.
Population will be studied in relation to what the geological conditions are in a given area. If you have so much arable land, so much water, that can only support so many people. When people are trained in dynamic equilibrium, in other words, if you produce a larger population than the area can support, you're going to have territorial disputes. If you don't deal with those problems, there are no other ways of dealing with it except maintaining a population in accordance with the carrying capacity of the environment. If you violate that, it won't work. It has nothing to do with human nature. It has to do with available resources.
In the areas today, like in India and China, that already have high population density,
we will educate them to the new orientation. And those that fail to join with us will not, and their system will break down.
Jack also has designs for areas of high population density in his cities. He has hundreds of city designs. With the advancement of nanotechnology, could we replace someone's brain in a virtual world with the ability to continue to learn via AI, so that even after the physical body passes away, could they be virtually immortalized?
I doubt whether anyone of the past that were brought back to life could add anything new. I would say if you go way back to 500 or 1,000 years ago, the value systems were very different, and it would be very difficult for people of the past to make the rapid adjustment necessary to live in a high-tech society. I've used this example many times. If you took your grandmother to Miami Beach and she saw the girls walking around with their butts hanging out, she might say they've gone too far. Well, where she's coming from, I can understand that. But she is not a changing person. She clings to traditional values. The harder you cling to traditional values, the slower you are to make the changes.
Can you describe the drainage system in your city models? How would you avoid flooding?
First of all, we go through a continental change in which we build canals and waterways to take floodwaters to storage basins, such as areas that we loused up the earth with strip mining. By making those or using those areas to contain floodwaters and diverting floods to storage basins, we can make better use. They always talk of water shortages, but they don't harness the floodwaters.
Is there a recording or book available online of your experiments with animals?
No, there's no such thing online.
We are in the process of working with somebody to do a book that has a lot of those examples in it, but that's an ongoing process. It's also going to be included in a film and then made into a book. Not the film that we're talking about that we want to do, but somebody else is doing as well. Mr. Fresco states that major social changes can happen only in times of crisis. History shows that modern time turning points in instability benefit mostly wealthy individuals in predictable rates. How can the Venus Project compete with existing monetary systems which are made to operate in constant crisis of some degree?
You have to understand that industry will eventually completely automate. And when you put in automation, you don't need heating in the wintertime. You don't need desks and lighting. You don't need pension plans. You don't need vacations. So industry will put in automated systems because it's cheaper to operate automated systems than employ people. So if you keep displacing people by automation, they won't have the purchasing power to buy the products turned out. And that brings the system to an end. Regardless of how powerful the monetary system is, it depends on people buying things. And if they lose their job, they can't buy things, and the system comes to an end. There is no way to preserve any system eternally. All systems undergo change. That goes for nature, animals, the history, evolution, all things change, including the continents which drift.
Jacques talks a lot about associative memory in his lectures. Is the ability to make associative memories what defines the intelligence of an individual, or are there other attributes?
First of all, the word intelligence is a false word, because an intelligent person, say 100 years ago, can't get a job today. If he's exposed to electronics 100 years ago, what we understood about electricity might make him intelligent then, but he can't function today. So the word intelligence has to be changed to degrees of appropriateness. As we learn more about things, we have more solutions to problems. If we don't learn as much, the word intelligence assigned to people has no meaning because it's an ongoing process. Just remember that anyone trained in operating a printing press 65 years ago is different than printing presses today. They couldn't get a job today. Even though they were intelligent then, they're not intelligent now. So I don't use the word intelligent. I say changes in values and information give us a different range of behavior. The wider the range of understanding, the greater your ability to participate. So the future will inform people constantly, update them as to what's new, so no one becomes obsolete.
In a YouTube video, you have mentioned that there is no such thing as a perfect society. According to you, which things are not perfect in your construction of a resource-based economy?
What's the question?
Which things are not perfect in the resource-based economy?
I don't know. If you do, tell us what it is.
There is no perfection. Everything's changing. Jacques always talks about that in his cities, that his cities would be a straitjacket for the next generation.
There's no such thing as utopias. Every idea, everything, electric lamps, radios, television, can all be changed, including your laptop. It'll get lighter, smaller, and then with molecular recording, it'll be extremely tiny. And when you start doing that, you have a different frame of reference. Most people have great difficulty in changing their frame of reference because they become victims of the culture they're reared in.
How do we integrate new discoveries and inventions, making technological progress and adaptation to changing world conditions when there are no knowledge dealings between machines and human?
Well, that's a statement you made. In the future, machines will share ideas, and machines will accumulate ideas from every lab, working on new materials, overcoming shortages by improvising newer materials that carry out the same function. If you decide that every roof should be made of stainless steel, the computer will tell us we don't have that much stainless steel. So you'd have to come up with an alternative. So labs are assigned decision making. In other words, they're assigned different tasks. Scientists are assigned tasks, just like the moon project. The government says we want to put a man on the moon, and they must supply sufficient funds and equipment to develop that concept. In other words, in the future, when a new concept is put forth, we have to study it and appropriate necessary material for the lab to develop new substitute material for shortages. And that's what happened in Germany. When we blockaded the Germans, prevented them from getting rubber from Sumatra, they invented synthetic rubber. I think we have enough technicians to invent all kinds of substitute material until we develop better materials. Never the optimal development. There's no such thing as designing the perfect utopian city. Everything is subject to change. There are no final frontiers. I've said this many times, but apparently some people do not fully understand what I'm saying.
How would it be proposed for people to voluntarily, quote, give up their personal properties if a transition were to occur?
I've lived during the last depression. As some of you know, I'm 94 years old, 95 years old. And so when you think about it, if you own a factory and people are not buying products, there's a recession. You can't even sell that factory. They don't have to give it up. The government takes over or the banks take over if you can't pay off a home, or if you can't pay off an industrial plant, or if you can't pay off a loan. What happens is these people make assumptions that the wealthy stay in power. They do not. When systems break down, banks fail. Industry fails. They shut the doors and says no help wanted. You can't even sell your production plant if a newer system comes up. So you can't hang on to the old system, even though you have a lot of money today. When the banks fail, you lose your money. When people aren't buying goods and services, you lose your industrial plant. You don't have to worry about people giving up anything.
How can we avoid any control from programmers and operators if artificial intelligence does not have human judgment?
Human judgment is frail and based upon background. I would say with the more people become familiar with the scientific method, they learn how to put things to test, to check them out, check out the value of water purification systems. They can check out the value of various metal alloys. They know how to check things out. So children do not belong to clubs like the Mickey Mouse Club. They are given superficial values.
The question was, how do we avoid the programmers taking over and controlling things in the resource-based economy?
There's no such thing as a programmer. The programmer is assigned different jobs, like certain types of metal are selected to put up skyscrapers. That's not arbitrarily done. It has to do with the alloy and the strength of the alloy for a given job. When you ask a man to design metals for automobile engines, that's based upon tests which the metal is put through. Abrasion, resistance, and fatigue, all those things determine how metals will be used, not the opinions of people. No one has control. They're assigned tasks. The task is to put a man on the moon or put people on Mars. And in order to do that, you have to know what Mars has. Does it have arable land? Does it have water? Does it have the facilities? Can man adjust to the gravitational field? All those things have to be studied, and decisions are not made. They're arrived at, which is very different than making decisions.
People have no advantage of making things that don't work in the system in the future. They gain nothing from it. Please describe step-by-step method which the Venus Project is going to apply to society as to how, let me see, okay. They want to know how you convert the resource-based economy and what's the timeline for that.
That depends on how much work you do. In other words, as we lecture throughout the world, a lot of people ask us the same question. I said, when you leave this lecture, if you've learned anything, talk to other people about the Venus Project. The more people that know about it, the smoother the transition. If you fail to take on the responsibility of reading our books or reading books that help you understand the nature of the scientific method, if you fail to do that, the transition will be painful and of a longer duration. The more people understand about it, the shorter duration, the less the pain.
Jacques and I really have no control. We have no control over the media or monetary control. So we can't give you any timeline how things will be done. As he says, it's up to what everybody does. But we constantly work at it. How does Mr. Fresco see human intelligence regarding human mind versus human brain?
The brain is a substance that conditioning works on. In other words, it's called associative memory. The neurons are charged electrically in terms of experience that you have. So if you have a great deal of experience in many areas, you might have more relevant information. If you invent your own concept of how the earth began, some god made a man and a woman, put them in a beautiful garden. If you were tuned to myths, your life will be one gigantic myth.
Do you differentiate between human mind and human brain? Do you use those terms?
The brain is where the associations occur, where your knowledge or experience is registered. The brain is a mechanism like a battery. A battery without a charge is mindless. In other words, your mind doesn't become charged unless you're subject to stimulus. If you're brought up in a gray ball and you're fed and taken care of, and there's no stimulation in the gray ball, such as changes in color, sound, all that sort of thing, the brain makes no associations except with the gray walls. You'll be a drooling idiot if you're let out of that gray ball when you're 15 years old. You'll have nothing in your head unless you stimulate the interior of that ball, change colors, change sounds, change events, so the brain can make associations. Without associations, your brain becomes so-called mindless.
Do you think you can use terms like human nature to describe influences of organ structure or hormones?
No, you can only describe reflexes, the knee reflex, certain reflexes that we have in relation to temperature. If you increase the temperature, the living system backs away from the temperature. If they have sensors to do that, a moth tends to fly into a flame, but it has what looks like feathers and antenna, and which is a heat sensor. When it gets too close to the fire, it turns away from it. But if you cut off those receptors, the moth flies into the flame.
In the book, The Best That Money Can't Buy, you talk about how children will be educated differently in the future. Would you be able to elaborate on the methods that could be used to do so?
Yes, I can. Children will be brought up to understand how nature and humans are interrelated. Human beings are not separate from nature. They're part of the natural rig. If we violate nature, meaning if we don't get enough sleep or enough healthy food, we get sick, regardless of what your philosophy is. So we have to bring up people in relation to the physical world, how they relate to one another and the world around them. Not make up stories about that, but actually find out how trees enhance us by giving out oxygen, absorbing carbon dioxide. The more they know about the physical world and the atmosphere and the Earth's conditions, the more they're able to evolve survival methods.
You also talk about setting up challenges for children instead of having father do everything or the mother solving all their problems. enable the children to work things out and set up situations for them where they have to solve problems.
We take away dependency, and we have little communities where children direct the future. We encourage them in the methods of survival. We encourage them in how to detect whether water is purified or contaminated. Everything we teach children are things that are relevant. That's why we have no Mickey Mouse clubs.
And reinforce all aspects of behavior that they do that's constructive or cooperative. If one person works a lot on a project and then gives it over to somebody else to complete it, but that original person who worked on it feels that it's damaging the project, how would you work something like that out in the future when working with a group of people? How would that be handled?
You don't take the butcher to design bridges. You have bridge engineers work on bridges. When you're building an electrical system for an industrial plant, you have industrial electronics experts that work on that. I don't understand the question, but this question assumes that we get anybody to work on anything. You can't do that. You don't call upon a florist to repair your plumbing. You call upon a plumber. So we call upon the appropriate people with the training in sufficient areas to be able to deal with those problems.
You said people in the future will be generalist. What does that mean?
They will understand social evolution. They will understand anthropology, physiology, psychology, human behavior, and the history of civilization, the changes that it undergoes. So knowing those things, they will understand the methods of checking things out. Right now, the average person doesn't know how to investigate claims made by other people that claim that our behavior is governed by the stars or the date you were born under. There's so many false systems out there, we will know how to check them out and what systems are to be rejected, not based upon personality, but based upon physical correlation. If claims cannot be backed by events or experiment, they are set aside, not necessarily rejected. They are set aside until further experiments can verify or ascertain their relevance.
What are some recommendations of resources for one to self-teach the technical educational required to help realize the Venus Project?
I don't know what self-teach means, but I do know that if you're educated in metallurgy, you learn what metals have greater duration, can survive under fatigue. You learn what metals can be flexed a great deal without breaking down. This is not something that's natural with people. You have to study that. If you don't study language, you will only babble. A child not exposed by parents to, the parents say cup, light, house, windows, continuously. Every word you use, you've heard many, many times. Even your facial expressions are picked up by culture.
Are you aware of this website, puts it in here, that presents a long list of scientists throughout history that investigated and found proof of afterlife and paranormal?
I have never seen anything like that. I would say that before you investigate anything, learn all that you can about it so you have something to investigate with. Many acts of telepathy that some people are convinced is real are done by posture. In other words, if you're sitting with your hand near your chin, you can communicate with another person and say that means President Roosevelt. If you're sitting with your hands clasped together, it might mean President Kennedy. There are hundreds of different words of coding so that your work with your associate understands that coding. But if you don't know the coding, you can't investigate telepathy or extraphysical phenomena. I was asked once to call a certain person in England, and he would tell me what president I had in mind. The way it's done, if the person in England is named Francois, if you ask for Mr. Gordon, it means President Roosevelt. If you ask for Mr. Smith, using the same telephone number, it means President Kennedy. So there are many different codes that you have to know about to investigate telepathy. Most telepathy that I've investigated was fraudulent.
Would there be historical societies in a resource-based economy?
Yes, there'll be historical societies, but mostly the history of advancement and technology, not superstition. That'll be very brief, but the real coordination will be based upon what we found out, that there are rivers under the ocean that flow in different directions. We know how and why they flow in those directions. Through the Coriolis effect, we would learn all that we know about things. And the things we don't know about, we would list and say, we don't understand how genes splice automatically. All that will be published. What we do know, what we don't know, what has to be researched further to arrive at decisions that are more appropriate.
Do you ever listen to your old lectures or change your views on what you have said in some of these lectures?
Yes, I do listen to old lectures. What happens to the views I had then, they become more elaborate, more detailed. In other words, I don't accept something unless there's some verification. So the more verification and the more information you accumulate, you don't need to change your views, you update them.
Do you think that our current technological abilities are actually 100 years more advanced than what we are told, and that it is only being used by the military in secret projects?
No, the military is trained to defend this country. They're trained to use armaments and high tech, such as nerve gas, nuclear weapons. They are not there to solve problems. They're there to enforce the law that we have in this country. The military are not designed to bridge the difference between nations. The military doesn't even know how.
Do you feel that they have technology that's secret and 100 years in advance of what we're using today, is the question?
No, not really.
Jacques has a lot of answers about what life and human behavior will be like in a resource-based economy. Since we have never implemented a global resource-based economy, would not all these answers actually be theories that would need to be tested via scientific method?
It is a scientific conclusion that you come to. Why can't you put 400 passengers in a 200-passenger airliner? You don't have to do it to know it won't get off the ground. You have to know what the horsepower is of the engines and the wing area and the capacity for plane to lift. It can't take off with 400 passengers. You don't have to build it to find out. You know enough about science, technology, and the methods of evaluation to anticipate. You don't have to actually do things. You can't put 20,000 passengers on an airliner or a seafaring unit or a ship. And when you put 1,000 passengers on a ship, that tells you how much water is needed, how much food is needed to make the journey. But you have to have the amount of passengers and you have to have the equipment to support those passengers for 10 days or 20 days at sea or whatever it is. That's already known. You don't have to do it. You have to have a basis for your assumptions.
How should we deal with bankers and politicians who are engaged in a conspiracy against the people, such as the New World Order?
You don't have to deal with them any more than you have to deal with men that shoe horses. As we go beyond that, as we go beyond the Iceman and the elevator operators, they're phased out because they no longer fit. You don't have to worry about them. They will fail when the monetary system uses enough to replace the purchasing power of most people. The system dies. You don't have to worry about them.
Would you consider it reasonable to incorporate other scientists and engineers into the Venus Project to help apply their latest technical expertise and discoveries to ongoing design projects?
Yes.
Is there a place where you want to create the first sustainable city of the Venus Project?
I have no choice in that matter. The first place that decides to build the new experimental city, put it to test, we will build it anywhere in the world where any nation wants to set up the first experimental city.
And this person asks, what if the government would attack the city?
First of all, I'm operating on the assumption that no one will build a city unless this system breaks down. If this system manages to survive somehow through war or artificiality or fascism, then the system will continue until it has reached its limits of sustainability. No system undergoes change due to logic and reason. They only undergo change when it no longer functions.
What if one or two of the people who we're talking to today actually do build a city now during a monetary system? Do you think it could get attacked?
It might not. I would never build a city unless we had many nations joined together to undertake this project. Unless they...
Will there be social stratification between people who have any technological or scientific knowledge and people who don't?
Yes, because television will no more have soap operas and manage news. We will always be updating the values of everybody watching.
Do you feel there'd be social stratification between those?
Not at all. No social stratification, no technical elitism, and no elitism of any kind.
People who have all different degrees of knowledge have equal access to goods and services and education, so they don't get less if they don't have certain knowledge in certain areas. If we build a, quote, sustainable city right now, do you think poor people will invade it?
We don't build sustainable cities unless the majority of people agree to the direction. If they don't agree with the direction, you cannot accomplish this end. If people don't understand the meaning of science, they can't do anything in the scientific world. If few people do, without training other people in the field, they cannot survive. We must share ideas rather than keep them to ourselves. A nation without a vision of the future is bound to repeat the same mistakes over and over again.
Why don't you talk about the system and how corrupt it is, or deal with issues like 9/11, corruption, etc., like Peter Joseph does?
I feel that we don't understand why these people flew the airplane into the towers in the first place. What horror did we do to those people to give them so much hatred? I've never heard the answer to that on television, radio, or any other publication. In other words, people just don't invade cities. We must have done some terrible things to them in the past to make them hate us so much.
I think Jacques does lay out the corrupt system. I think if this person reads the book, The Best That Money Can't Buy, you'll find that he does that. But what's more important to Jacques is that instead of just talking about what's wrong, which people do, is to pose a direction to work toward to eliminate those problems. And Peter did get the direction from Jacques and from that book as to all the things he talks about is in terms of a resource-based economy. So Jacques does do both. How do you keep warm in the houses in very cold areas without burning?
Fuel.
That's a question. I don't know.
Oh, well. First of all, we orient the house in relation to the position of the sun. We arrange the trees around the house so in very hot weather the roof does not absorb heat. The roof itself becomes an electrical generator. You don't just have a roof on a building. It not only generates electricity, but it produces hot water. The way we design our buildings is so that every inch of that building serves the occupants of that building. It's just like the skin on the human body. It not only covers the musculature, it has secretions that can evaporate fluids and cool the body. The skin serves many functions. In the future, buildings will be designed so that every portion of that building, including the windows, generate electricity.
How would you feel about people who support the Venus Project policing social networks, correcting incorrect or erroneous views? I think this is great for people to get on the internet and blogs and any place that they can to introduce these ideas and talk about the Venus Project, or just talk about the ideas in general. In a world where you can do any job you like, what will happen with the jobs that nobody likes? For example, cleaning.
In France today, they have a public washroom. When you leave it, it's self-cleaning. I don't know how many of you know about that, but look it up on the internet. Self-cleaning systems.
What would Jacques say about effects of collective consciousness on, say, the vote in the O.J. Simpson trial?
There's no such thing as collective consciousness. You're only as conscious as your receptors. You can't see radio waves or feel radio waves. You can't see bacteria. A microscope extends human awareness. All technology, machines like the electron microscope, the telescope, all those are extensional devices that extend human senses. But the human brain today and the human senses are not that adequate to make us conscious. We are only as conscious as our receptors. But the more extensional devices we make, like microscopes, electronic measuring instruments, we can probe areas that we cannot sense.
In order for a resource-based economy to be implemented, will there need to be a constitutional convention in the United States with an updated amendment to support the new social economic structure?
The Constitution, you are brought up to believe, is a great piece of paper, and that's all it is, a piece of paper. If you have to write your congressman for equal rights for women, there's something wrong with your culture. If it's subject to interpretation, there's something wrong with your culture. The language of science, physics, mathematics, chemistry is not subject to interpretation. Our language was designed hundreds of years ago. Therefore, it's inadequate and subject to interpretation. As long as you have a language that's subject to interpretation, you're going to have conflict.
Do you see any forms of fossil fuels or hydrocarbons used in a resource-based economy?
Well, with the advent of nanotechnology, I believe we will be able to make all kinds of new materials. And if nanotechnology does not occur in 10 or 15 years, that the nanotechnologists tell us, it's already doing wonderful work, nanotechnology. But if it doesn't occur, we will make the next best thing that we know how to make. You don't hire carpenters to build bridges. You hire carpenters to make furniture or do woodworking. So in the future, we will train people to learn how to say, I don't know, and learn how to investigate ideas that they are not that familiar with. They will learn how to make more appropriate decisions than they make today, which are based on feelings only, rather than observation.
How will you deal with jealousy in a resource-based economy?
When you understand that your preference for friendship, when you're 10 years old, you have certain friends. When you're 12 years old, you move up the scale and you select other people. You're in a constant state of change. But jealousy is not being aware that there are many different sets of values. If a person rejects you, say you're in love with a person and they reject you, you feel bad, you feel insufficient. But if you understand you too have rejected people because they don't come up to your standards, it doesn't make your standards correct. It makes them different. So learning to permit other people to make their decisions as appropriate as it may be to their background. You see, rejection is a normal thing. Jealousy is learned. Greed is learned. Race prejudice is learned. So all kinds of corruption is learned. But if you learn how to relate to the real world, you understand that people have different values due to the fact that they come from different environments. Once you're rejected by a person, it doesn't make you jealous. It enables you to understand that they have a different set than you do.
Will your cybernated government make all decisions? What about social decisions or personal decisions?
All personal decisions are based upon environmental exposure. I've said this many times. If you're raised as a baby by the headhunters of the Amazon, you'd be a headhunter, unless you traveled, read books, saw other things.
Would the cybernated government make personal decisions for you?
No one makes personal decisions. They arrive at decisions. They don't make them. I've said this many times. If you don't know what that means, it means you test things and check them out.
I think that they're afraid of cybernated government telling you what to do.
Does cybernated government tell you what to do? No. It only informs you as to what's available, what's not available, what we do know, and what we don't know.
It doesn't dictate your life.
No.
How will you deal with people that would harm the system you envision?
I don't understand that. If we manage the schools of the future and we teach people about the physical world and their relationship to it, we don't understand how a person could come out of school that different that they want to harm things unless they have a mental disorder, unless their brain is somehow warped. And I don't know how that would happen because we check things out, we physically examine people to the best of our ability and make sure that they do not influence the direction of the culture if their opinions are not based upon physical findings. I wouldn't know how a person like that can come about in a resource-based economy. People are educated to understand that if you were brought up in France, you'd speak French. If you're brought up in Germany, you'd think like a German. It's so evident, self-evident, continuously evident that the environment shapes values and behavior. In Germany, the scientists fell in line with Hitler. Those that didn't agree left Germany. In France, the scientists fell in line with France. In Japan, they fell in line with the Japanese. There's no such thing as a scientist. A scientist would say, what makes war? Why do people kill each other? They'd get out of their little discipline like chemistry, physics, botany, mathematics, and ask new questions. When scientists talk of a sane nuclear policy and they don't tell us how to achieve it, it's like a verbal hobby.
Today, people take advantage of one another just for their own benefit. They're like vultures today in the monetary system. You get a toothache, somebody gets thousands of dollars fixing your tooth. You're able to exist over the troubles of other people. So in the future, where everybody is participating to make your life better, it would be like somebody saying, well, what would you do if you have people in the future cutting off their arms? If everybody in the system is extensional and helpful to one another, there'd be no reason to hurt other people, unless there's brain damage, and you can find that out very early in life.
There are no prisons, no police, no armies, no navies, no violence shown in the movies to change the frame of reference of people. We only show our relationship to the real world.
Who would get to live in the cities?
During the initial phases, the planners would be working on the design of cities, correcting functions that do not work too well, improving the city itself, re-engineering the materials that the city is made of. So in the beginning, the planners would be called upon. And then when the first city is built, we would then check with people and say, what is it that you dislike about the cities? And so we would take those things into consideration and try to design the cities that meet the needs of people in the future.
What will we do if you're no longer alive when the world is ready to work on developing a resource-based economy? Who would lead the development? Who will guide these wishes to implement it the way you designed it?
It isn't me. It's the methods of science. If you use the methods of science in arriving at the design of cities, if you design your cities too far away from electrical generators, the power losses would be too high. So we have transmission engineers that tell you to build a power source near the new city. In other words, if you have to travel to work for 1 hour, that wastes a lot of energy. So people living next to the medical center or the health center, where you can't see another building, where trees obscure industrial plants, and where industrial plants operate silently, they make no noises, and they could be near the cities. But they don't have to be far from the cities. if it takes too much energy to operate. So I would say on the basis of energy determinants, we decide where factories are built, where cities are built. If you have to transport energy sources great distances, you have to include the energy required to transport that fuel or operating mechanism to that place. So everything has to be considered before you design a city. It has to be worked out so that you use a minimum amount of energy for maximum contribution to society.
Do you think we could get rid of all forms of police, security forces, or do you think there'd be a simply delegated community mentor holding that role?
You don't need that if you understand what it is that shapes human values. If you don't understand what that means, if you lived in the South, you'd speak with a Southern accent, and you'd be biased against Afro-Americans. If you lived in an uneducated region of the South, we have no such regions. We have no poverty, no street people, no prisons, and no police. So if you don't have those conditions that generate aberrant behavior, you don't have aberrant behavior.
Would atomic weapons be used for something else? Would they have to be dismantled, or maybe could they be used for construction, large-scale construction? Do they have any place in a resource-based economy, atomic weapons?
I would say that a lot of research would be done on how to use nuclear materials for the benefit of society. There'd be studies of the positive and negative retroaction of any system. Even before we build a dam, we ask questions. What are the good portions of the dam? What's the negative side of a dam? The negative side is that fish can't get to the spawning grounds. So you have to have stepped areas so the fish can climb up on the side of the dam to get to the areas that they are conditioned or stimulated to move toward. In other words, you have to design not just a dam to generate energy and hold back water. You try to get it to do as many functions as possible.
This person is an animal rights activist. They're saying today there are 50 billion chickens that are slaughtered after they live in terrible conditions. Do you think there's a solution apart from a world of veganism?
Well, I would say yes, there are many solutions. Again, with the advent of technology, we'll be able to produce tissue, human tissue, liver tissue, by just taking atoms and arrange them into the same molecular structure of different materials. In the distant future, we won't have to grow food. And I'm not talking about genetic modification, because genetic modification could be dangerous. If you splice genes to change food without a long historical study of the prime effects of the modification, I would say we would not engage in it unless things were very carefully studied over a long period of time.
I understand that the scientific method is the basis for a resource-based economy. What do you think about people inside the Venus Project and the Zeitgeist movement that have superstitious beliefs?
They wouldn't want to join the Zeitgeist movement or the Venus Project. I'm saying the people of the Venus Project have to study the Venus Project, read our books and direction. Otherwise, they do not represent the Venus Project, although they join up for their own assumptions of what they think the Venus Project is about. You have to read up on the Venus Project. You have to watch their films and become familiar with the direction. If a person calls himself a doctor without studying the medical procedures of medicine, he would be considered not qualified. There are many people that have their opinions about the Venus Project that have never asked questions about it, but continue to follow their own opinions, which has no representation of the Venus Project. And a lot of people ask questions, and the questions they ask, they cannot even understand the answers because they don't know enough about the factors that shape human behavior.
This person asked how the script is coming. It's coming well. We're waiting for some meetings that we have coming up for people in the field, so we are working on it. Have you ever worked in medicine? What are your views about homeopathic medicine?
When put to test without bias, we will use whatever system that works.
Regarding the selling of the city, can we not use it for funding mechanism for future cities?
If you want to during the transition, but I don't think it would be very successful.
How can we begin to build the first city then?
We cannot build it unless a group of nations agree that they would like to fall in line with the Venus Project's procedures. If they don't use our procedures, we will not work on a city with them. If people decide to build their own cities, it's not the Venus Project. I have nothing to say about that.
Okay, I think that's all for today. Thanks to Jacques and Roxanne for coming and spending time answering these questions.
Thanks, everyone. Do you want to go over the idea of the city you just talked about?
I don't need to, because
Okay.
if I'm in charge of the city, it would mean that we would educate children in terms of the physical world, to think in terms of physical reference for the language they use. If they don't do that, they will repeat the same awkward problems over and over again. It isn't the Venus Project if you take it in some other direction. If you don't like some aspects of the Venus Project, raise a question. What do you do with people that don't want to live in the Venus Project? What do you do with people who want to build their own community? They go ahead and build their own community. We don't dictate policy to other people. We only point out the advantages of the Venus Project. If there are shortcomings, bring them up so we can examine them, question them.
We are talking to two different groups about a city project, and we'll see how far we can take it toward this direction.
If they're not willing to follow this direction, I'm not interested in the project.
Gotcha. Okay, well, thanks, everyone. We appreciate your questions a lot. And
your criticism.
yes. So we'll see you next week then.
Yes, thank you very much.
Talk to you next week. Thanks
All
again.
of you.
We appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
They answered three of my question. It's very nice.
That question about being disabled and in a wheelchair, that one's been answered quite a few times. In fact, it's on almost all of the Q&As since we started. Same question over and over. The basic answer to that is that in a resource-based economy where we're not doing things because we get monetary gain from them, you'll find that a lot of people without the restrictions of this current system will want to work in fields where it actually benefits other people's lives. You won't find many doctors or nurses, especially nurses, that work in this system because they want to make billions and billions of dollars. They're doing it because they want to help people. And I think with less restrictions on people getting into college and things like this, more and more people will be likely to help, a lot more than in this current system. Okay, thanks everyone for coming.